Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to discuss falsehoods that programmers believe about projects. This is a riff on, many years ago, a guy named Patrick McKenzie, who is a legendary software developer, mostly for being very verbose and writing amazingly detailed discussions about minutia. He had a 40 or so element thing about falsehoods programmers believe about names, like that people have names, or that names don't change, or that they don't change often, or that there is some number of names, or that they have some number, like just all these programs. And you're saying, depending upon your culture, you're going to buy in and make these mistakes, and your culture will be showing when you make these mistakes as a programmer.
Interesting.
And that caused a short-lived burst of other falsehoods that programmers believe about other things. And I checked, and nobody ever wrote falsehoods programmers believe about projects. And that is one of the themes of our show. So I put it up on my blog, Sherman on Software. And I thought we could go through them and get some reaction to them.
Sure. Yeah, let's go.
So all of these assumptions are wrong. And if you have these assumptions and you go by them, you're going to screw up your projects as a programmer.
Okay. We're already starting with an absolute. Okay.
Well, they are all wrong in some cases. They are not universally true. So
okay, I see.
So assumption number one: projects have defined beginnings. I don't know about you, but I have many times had people be like, "Yo, we're starting this project soon. Here's what it is. So I need you to scope it out." And I said, well, did the project start? Is it really going? Is it not going? Am I like, where are we? So the idea that if people are asking you about a project, if you're working on a project, that means it started or it hasn't started, like none of that's true. Which goes into point two. But maybe projects don't have a formal beginning, but there is a point at which you're supposed to start working. I don't know if you've ever started working. Have you ever worked on a project that you shouldn't be?
That I shouldn't be working on?
Well, like it's not like it's not officially funded, or
it's
not a priority yet, according to some people, but not according to others.
Yeah.
No. Number three, your manager knows when you should start working on a project. No reaction.
So I'm curious. Well, I guess I'm curious about like even number two before we go into three.
Yeah.
Like, so the assertion is there's never a point in which you're supposed to start work.
I'm saying that there will be times when you're doing projects where it is not clear whether you should be starting work on it yet. Because some people will tell you yes, and some people will tell you no. You will get mixed signals, and you will also get missed signals. So mixed and missed. Like, people say, oh yeah, this project's coming up. And then all of a sudden, like, well, didn't you start on this project 3 weeks ago when I told you it was coming up? Like, it's coming up, it's due. You're like, well, nobody told me to start working on it. It's like, oh, well, we needed you to be working this like a month ago. Like, but what about my other priorities? Well, yeah, you need those too, but we needed this. You need.
I guess as you're listing off the falsehoods that programmers believe, I think because of the universal "it depends" of everything, like I can see cases where this is a truth for some things and a falsehood for some things. But because, for example, I have worked on like your first point, I've worked on a project that has had a defined beginning. Like, we're going to kick off on this day, and this is when the programming work is going to begin, and everyone's going to be focused on this priority. I've also worked on projects where it didn't. Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out how to understand these falsehoods.
Yes. I'm not saying that you will never have a project that has a defined beginning. I'm saying that you will often have projects that don't have defined beginnings.
Got you. All right. It's just these are overzealous assumptions that are not always true.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Right. If you assume that, somebody's going to tell you, like, there's no starting gun a lot of times. Projects sort of just creep in. And it's like, oh, it's here. It's been here for months.
Yeah, gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
Falsehood
So
number
where are we
four.
at? There we go. Four.
Four. You can use your priorities to determine when you should start working on a project. So if you know
Mm.
your priorities and you know the project's priority, then in theory you can say, oh, well, this is less important than this other work that I'm doing and more important than these other things. So I'm going to finish the more important stuff and then I'll get to this project. And that is a bad assumption because it assumes that you understand that your understanding of your priorities matches other people's understandings of your priorities.
I've run into this one a ton. Because it makes sense to me because I'm like, oh, well, we have this huge project with a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone understands that deadline or even knows I'm on that project. So I've had things recently where someone's like, hey, where are we at with Project Y? And I'm like, oh, well, I haven't even been thinking about Project Y since we discussed it 2 months ago because we've been working on this deadline
Project
and the
X.
renewed contract of some other thing. And I guess there was not that closed loop of feedback that they would have known that I've been working on that thing, because not everybody in the company knows all the different intricacies of the different pieces that have to be kept working, right? So
Right,
they
and
only
that's a
know about
great
what they
way
have to know about. Yeah,
to frame it of a lot of these are feedback failures where people
yeah,
talk
okay,
to you a little bit or they don't talk to you a little bit and they assume that you know things or don't know things. Uh, and those assumptions will come back because in project work it's all about feedback and intercommunication, and these are assumptions that you, if you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to work on this until they tell me to start, or I'm not going to work on it until it's I determine it's my priority, then that assumption is inevitably you will be wrong often, and people will be
got it.
frustrated.
Let's see how many of these are feedback loop problems for each one after this.
So for number 5, you should be working on a project because you were asked.
Mm. I've had
Which
this happen when someone goes above my manager and asks me to do something.
yes,
Especially if they're
people.
at high ranking level than my manager.
Yes, I tend to get it from both ends where we've talked many times about being helpful and going to people with and working on their problems, which is unofficial project work often,
Yeah.
and then you become someone that they can come to, and there's this cycle, well, not a cycle, but there's this, you have to learn how to manage that of, oh, well, this is this is super useful and valuable and I should totally do this because
Hmm.
they asked and they explained how valuable it would be to the company, but also it's not official project work, so I totally shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. That's kind of a brutal one because I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely been in that tug of war between like, here's an example of one. We had this, I found out one of the people on my team always was doing this kind of manual work to add new entities into our database. In a way, like from a spreadsheet. And I was like, oh well, we can easily take that spreadsheet and map it to columns, and
Mm-hmm.
you're adding like 300 or 400 of these a week,
Dear God.
and I can just write a script to do that for you immediately. But I couldn't just write a script to do that for him. I was thinking, man, I could really help him out here. But in reality, the work that I had to do was actually much more higher pressing, and the amount of money we lost doing that manually was not nearly as much money as we'd be saving if I got my work done.
Mm.
So, but then I still felt bad because they're stuck in that tedious work. I'm like, oh, if you just give me an hour, 2 hours to get the script ready for you, I will make your life amazing. So that's
I've
hard.
been there.
Yeah.
And then there's the flip side of that. You should not be working on a project because you weren't asked. So this is
Mm.
sometimes you need to butt in and be like, hey, nobody
Oh.
asked me, but this project is something that I actually know quite a lot about, and I can tell that you're doing it wrong. And not in the you're doing it wrong in an arrogant way, but like, in payments, there's a lot of
Yeah.
regulations and stuff. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're just going to end up having to redo it. And having subject matter expertise, not even in a technical way, but like just, I'm sure at this point, tons more about payments. Well, I don't know anything about payment. Like you know a lot about payment processing. And if I said, "Oh, I'm doing this payment processing thing," it would be wonderful as a coworker if you butted in and was like, "Yeah, let me tell you about some of the pitfalls you're
Yeah,
going to find right here."
that's a good point too. Yeah, I think I don't know how many times. Actually, I think maybe even as a principal engineer, you should be kind of aware. Like I say that because that's my current role. You should be kind of aware of the things that are happening at your company and the projects that are being spun up or discussed, just
Mm-hmm.
for that reason. Because I might have worked with somebody really closely and paired with them on some piece of the system, and someone else is like, "Oh, what about we A/B test this, or what about we make changes here and test this out?" And then if it's like that kind of tribal knowledge and it's just stuck in one area, then one other person might get put on it and have to relearn the exact same stuff. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
when you dive into legacy code and you spend all this time learning a system, you're like, oh, that's what that does, and you add a comment, and you're like, oh, and you just keep hitting every bit of like weird bespoke stuff.
Yeah.
And then imagine if you just didn't share any of that knowledge and you left. And then someone else came in and went, oh, and they just hit every single thing you just hit. All of that wasted time, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
really good to be really cognizant of what people are working on. That way they don't have to do that. Like, oh, Joe over there actually hit all those exact same things that Jane's going to run into if we don't let them know that this has been worked on before or there's expertise here.
Right
So I
here.
really
This
like
is
the
where the
idea
dragons.
of butting in there. Yeah.
Um, and again, you shouldn't always butt in. There are times when you should butt in. Like just because nobody has asked you doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
shouldn't. It also doesn't mean that you should.
Know when to tastefully butt in.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Know when to butt in and know when to fold them and know when to run away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's a stretch.
it sounded
Nice
better in
try.
my head. All right, I think we have time for one more group here. So number
Okay.
7, projects have defined endings. I have worked on projects that have defined endings. I've been at this for 24 years now, so I have encountered
Hmm.
this, but this is rare in
Yeah.
my history. It is extremely rare that you have a project that has a defined specific ending.
I've never had that. I mean, we've had a deadline to have something live, but almost always there was, a shuffle to get it live, and there was some sacrifices to be made to get it live, and everyone knew that you had to
Phase
fix the rest of it.
one, phase
Yeah.
one went live.
Phase one. And then because you're going to have some feedback, and that's going to require phase two to fix the feedback, and then there might be some bugs, and then suddenly it's alive, and you have to maintain it forever. So it never ends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've never had a project that's just like, oh, okay, we're done.
The projects that I've had that had defined endings were we hired penetration testers and this is the list of
Mm.
things that they gave us to fix.
That's a
Or
good example. Okay.
um, the government changed the regulations and so you have to change how the software works by this date. Or, there are financial consequences because now the software is out of compliance. Um,
That's also a good
right,
one.
but those have deadlines that are the penetration test deadline, it wasn't artificial, but like the creation of the list was artificial. It was out external. Somebody created a list and said you have to do this, or the
Right.
government created a list and said you have to change this, and then the list was done right until they changed the law again.
Yeah, I think we called it a forcing function
A forcing function, right?
in one of our previous episodes. I like that. A forcing
Yeah.
function that makes you adhere to the stipulations by a certain time.
Yeah.
So those are good examples. Yeah, I think the ones that pop in my head always are ones I'm so used to dealing with customers and indecisive people that the idea of a decisive you must be compliant by date is not the first thing that pops up.
It should. You're in payments now.
Yeah.
uh, so off the back of projects having defined ending, successful projects have endings. Uh, so you might think, oh, well, this project is going to succeed and then it will be over. And honestly, I found that successful projects are less likely to have an ending because then the project becomes an ongoing maintenance thing. And it sort of
Yeah.
it doesn't, there's not a clean back up, all right, boom, we have successfully changed, delivered this new software. The new software project is over. Now we're moving to a maintenance project.
Hmm.
That almost never happens. It just sort of peters out.
Is the new project itself the new maintenance project? Is that what you're suggesting? Because that's the first thing I think is a successful project is now a new paying feature that we have to maintain.
Right. Successful projects end up becoming features that have to be maintained, and they don't go away.
Right. So it's the same project, it's just the work slightly shifts.
Yeah. And it peters out, but it never fully goes away.
Right.
And then last one for this episode, failed projects have endings. So you might think, oh, well, a successful project, okay, cool. It becomes this thing that we have to maintain and continue to build on for years and years and years. But if we have a failed project, certainly it ends.
And don't they?
Rarely.
What's a failed project that's not ended that's actually failed, rather than someone just trying to keep it alive?
So if you imagine if you are doing a rewrite and you get halfway through and you have some features on the new platform and most of the features on the old platform, but you never turn off the old platform, then your project is a failure because you failed to achieve the goal of rewriting and getting rid of the old platform. But you now have new software that you now have to maintain. So now you've gotten none of the value that you expected and all of the cost, and it's never going to go away.
Gotcha. I guess I assumed if it failed, you'd default back to the old system, and the new one would never go live. But if you're in this halfway point, then yeah, that would suck.
Right. Right. The only time failures ever really go away is if they're experiments and you realize they were failures.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm doing this experiment. This experiment didn't work. I'm turning off the code. The end. And that's, although I guess that's a success almost, because I've successfully tested this idea and it was not
Task
good.
successfully failed.
Yeah, task successfully failed.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah.
But yeah, anytime that you have software that doesn't fully achieve its goals, but also doesn't get turned off, right? It's just going to live on forever. Yeah. And I think that is a good place to leave it. We should do part 2 of this another time.
Sure. Yeah. These have been actually, I've been thinking about these live. I didn't have any responses to these. So this is kind of like, wait, what? It is kind of nice to talk through them. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Some of them are a little strange sounding, especially as we get deeper on the list. But all right. Well, thank you all for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.